The fight for air travelers' rights on this Monday night. Ottawa's proposed reforms aimed at better protecting passengers.
If it's not your issue, you shouldn't have to jump through hoops.
Why some critics say these changes don't go far enough. Hoping for an exit strategy.
We don't know. People can hang in there.
What's Ottawa's plan to help Canadians stranded in Sudan? Preparing for a potential invasion, how Taiwan is looking for lessons from Ukraine. And the Stone of Scone.
It's really an iconic object.
An ancient symbol of Scottish sovereignty's contentious history.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. As travelers click the Book Now button on flight websites, many are hoping the bumpy summer of 2022 won't be duplicated. But over the past year, the number of air passenger complaints to Canada's transport regulator has more than tripled, hitting a record high. Tonight, the federal government is promising to toughen up on airlines.
And it will no longer be the passenger who will have to prove that he or she is entitled to compensation. It will now be the airline that will need to prove that it does not have to pay for it.
The transportation minister calls the changes significant, but some passenger rights advocates say the proposed rules still fall short. Touria Izri has our top story tonight.
Canada is trying to get back on course after a year of travel chaos and tens of thousands of complaints.
I think it's time that we do that. It's ridiculous.
If it's not your issue, then you shouldn't have to jump through hoops in order to get what you're owed.
The federal government is rewriting the Passenger's Bill of Rights to make it easier to get compensation for delayed or canceled flights.
This means there will be no more loopholes where airlines can claim a disruption is caused by something outside of their control.
Ottawa is promising to simplify the complaints process and reduce the burden on customers.
The onus for proving compensation is going to be in the hands of the airline. That's a very big change from what we currently have, where the passengers are doing all the work.
The government plans to toughen fines for airlines tenfold, from $25,000 to $250,000. But enforcement is the big question. The government agency that handles disputes admitted last winter it has never fined a carrier for failing to provide compensation.
This is a relatively new regime.
The changes come as the government tries to chip away at a backlog of 45,000 complaints.
I've never gotten compensated for anything. They just get me a new flight, and I missed 4 days of my trip and I didn't get compensated for it.
The transport minister insists the overhaul will change that, saying Canada is bringing in stronger rules than the European Union, considered the gold standard. The NDP transport critic disagrees.
The Liberals have chosen to double down on an approach that's complex, bureaucratic, and expensive.
The New Democrats want to see automatic compensation and more clarity about exemptions. For now, it seems airlines won't be on the hook in the event of severe weather.
So this is Canada. Winter is something that the airlines and the airports have to get used to.
The government is still working out the details around exemptions or compensation for lost or delayed baggage. But it will likely be a while before Canadians see money in their pockets. The changes won't come into effect until the federal budget passes, which is expected later this spring. Farah?
Touria Izri at Ottawa International Airport. Thank you, Touria. Dozens of Canadians have been airlifted out of Sudan on board a German plane as the ongoing violence pushes the nation deeper into crisis.
Just heard earlier today that a German plane lifted off from Khartoum with one German citizen on it and 58 Canadian citizens on it. Which is, I pointed out, we have a C-17 in the region too, and we will be airlifting as well.
But there's no word on when exactly that C-17 will be used to get more Canadians out. And for those left behind, the situation is growing increasingly dire. Mike Drolet reports.
Under the cover of darkness, the Dutch military landed in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum to rescue its citizens from the burgeoning conflict. Other countries followed suit, including Germany, France, Spain, and Italy, to name a few. 58 Canadians hitched a ride with Germany. But if Canada has a plan to get the rest of its citizens to safety, it's not saying.
The situation in Sudan is changing by the minute.
The government is seeking assistance from like-minded countries, but for now the 1,600 Canadians registered in Sudan are still being told no air evacuations are possible and that you're responsible for your own safety.
It really worries me that we have Canadians who are stuck there, who've been told there is no hope. And to me, it just shows a government that really doesn't care about, either bolstering our military to the point where they can respond or just having a plan to address this.
In the 10 days since fighting began, Khartoum and its residents have been under siege. Gas and food are scarce, there's no access to cash, and residents are left with a choice to shelter in place or seek a way out. Sudanese Canadian Zainab Yousif and her family in Khartoum have long since decided on the latter.
Absolute necessity, desperation. We don't know how long people can hang in there.
For the past week, she's been scouring social media for any avenue to leave, but as quickly as one opens, it closes. Complicating matters are reports of opportunists extorting thousands of dollars for safe passage.
It honestly feels like my Sudanese family and friends and community, they're left to fend for themselves. So for me, that exodus is a big sign that things are not going to get better.
It's a humanitarian crisis that could still somehow worsen if the warring sides don't put down their guns. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
China's foreign minister is warning Taiwan and its allies that they are playing with fire if they go against Beijing's claim over the self-governing island democracy. Political tension in the region is at its highest in decades, and the Chinese military drills simulating attacks on Taiwan have now become routine. Now the Taiwanese are preparing for an invasion by taking lessons from Ukraine. Jeff Semple reports from Taiwan.
3 years ago, Canadian veteran Ray Buxton and his Taiwanese wife bought their dream home, steps from the beach on the southern edge of Taiwan.
It's a nice area. It's beautifully quiet most of the time, especially at night.
But after a couple of months, that quiet was interrupted.
Right like a bat out of hell came these 2 fighter jets.
The Taiwanese planes scrambled from a nearby airbase to confront a fleet of Chinese fighter jets heading straight for Taiwan.
It's all part and parcel with CCP propaganda. I mean, show of strength, saber rattling, provocation.
So this has become something of a routine here. Chinese warplanes fly off in the direction of Taiwan. Taiwanese fighter jets are forced to respond, issue a warning, and eventually the Chinese planes turn back to the mainland. It's like this all the time with the noise.
This 80-year-old lives near the airbase and says the jet engines roar from dawn till dusk. Her bedroom ceiling recently collapsed from a shockwave. The local mayor says the Chinese flyovers have become a regular event, with the largest drills coming anytime Taiwanese officials meet with U.S. or other Western leaders, like they did this month. Now, every time Buxton hears the jets coming,
I wonder, is this it? Could this be it? Admittedly, there have been a couple semi-sleepless nights. We're worried about the future, just like many other people.
The Taiwanese have lived under existential threat for 70 years, and many have learned to ignore it. But Beijing's recent rhetoric and military moves are prompting some to prepare. This NGO is one of several recently launched to provide survival training for civilians, from first aid to search and rescue. Organizers overwhelmed by the demand, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine.
I think it drove home the message that our world can get turned upside down just like that, right, at the whim of an autocrat.
Well, Ukraine thwarted Russia's full-scale invasion. Recently leaked U.S. intelligence suggests Taiwan is highly vulnerable to a Chinese air attack, with barely half its aircraft said to be fully mission-capable.
Hi. Welcome to Ottawa. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for seeing us.
We put concerns about Taiwan's military readiness to its Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Is Taiwan prepared for the prospect of a Chinese invasion?
This is a very good question, that the Taiwanese people are more determined than ever in defending ourselves.
His government is extending mandatory military service from 4 months up to a year, while ramping up defense spending. A Ukrainian flag hangs in his office for inspiration.
The Ukrainians are able to withstand the onslaught of one of the largest military in the world. And that tells us that determination and strategy might matter. We are learning from the biblical prophecy of David versus Goliath. And I want to say that Taiwan will prevail and democracy will prevail.
There's a lot of catching up that needs to be done.
This Canadian security analyst has lived in Taiwan for 2 decades. After years of Taiwanese complacency, he says, Beijing's belligerence is a wake-up call.
Beijing, I would argue, shot itself in the foot with its major drills. It again makes it the threat all the more apparent to the Taiwanese, since they are adamant that they want to defend their way of life. They are willing to do what is necessary.
A recent poll found the vast majority of Taiwanese would fight to defend their democracy. The lesson from Ukraine: if a powerful neighbor invades, don't count out the underdog. Jeff Semple, Global News, Taipei.
Taiwan has been targeted by the Chinese government's disinformation and meddling for years. Tomorrow, how Taiwan is fighting back against interference campaigns and what Canada could learn from their experience. New federal research suggests that this country may be seriously underestimating its oil sector's impact on our climate. This is according to a new study by Environment and Climate Change Canada. Alberta's oil sands are releasing far more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than what's been reported. Heather Urex West explains how that could be putting Canada's own climate goals at risk.
It's an industry that drives the Canadian economy, but the oil and gas sector produces much of the country's greenhouse gas emissions as well.
It's about a quarter of our emissions are associated with the production and kind of processing of oil and gas before it turns into end-use products.
Right now, oil sands emissions are measured using engineering estimates looking at how much fuel is being combusted on the ground. But a new federal study measured emissions using samples collected from the air above the Athabasca oil sands in 2018. The air samples measured over 30 megatons more CO2 than what had been otherwise reported.
30 megatons is on the order of a small European country like Switzerland, their entire annual emissions for a year. So it's quite big, or as another perspective, it would be about 6% of Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions.
The oil industry says while it welcomes new research, it does have concerns about this particular study. For one, it says emission rates were determined from a limited number of flights with short intervals of sampling time and did not take into consideration days when facilities were not in operation. Canada's Environment Minister says he's yet to review the results of the report, but the study adds to a growing body of evidence suggesting Canada's level of greenhouse gas emissions is not fully understood.
It's worrisome if we keep finding additional emissions above and beyond what we originally had identified, because it means that there is more work for us to do.
Because no matter the starting point, the deadline to reach the country's net zero target is just over 2 decades away. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
The demands to make a deal. Coming up, how talks are going between Ottawa and striking government workers. There is no end in sight to a public service strike disrupting important services across our country. More than 155,000 federal workers are on their 6th day of job action, demanding better pay and more flexibility. And now they're moving picket lines to more strategic locations. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, joins us from Ottawa with where things stand. David.
Well, Farrell, both sides were at the negotiating table today, even as the union tried to ramp up efforts to get a deal. The Public Service Alliance of Canada set up picket lines at some of Canada's ports, including the country's busiest port in Vancouver.
We're out here today because Public Service Alliance of Canada members are escalating strike actions from coast to coast to coast.
Striking workers also picketed outside the East Coast headquarters of Canada's Navy. And they tried to disrupt operations at the Port of Montreal.
All I can say is please be patient, please support us. That's how we're going to get to an end.
Montreal's Port Authority said the impact on operations there was minimal. New picket lines were also set up outside some RCMP stations in Alberta and Newfoundland, at Coast Guard stations in BC and Ontario, and at federal penitentiaries in Ontario. In the House of Commons, New Democrats took up the cause of striking workers.
Workers deserve to be treated with respect, but Canada's public service workers have been without a contract for 2 years.
The government says the union came to the table with 570 demands, and all but a handful have now been resolved.
Our team has been working around the clock to negotiate new collective agreements that are fair, competitive, and reasonable.
Still, wages and work from home rules are the key issues. Farah.
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thank you, David. Seismic shakeups ahead. 2 major on-air personalities in the U.S. make abrupt exits.
And we'll be back on Monday. In the meantime, have the best weekend.
Well, it's certainly not the Monday Tucker Carlson was expecting. That ended up being his final broadcast on Fox News. The controversial right-wing TV host is out. In a statement, the network says both parties agreed to part ways, immediately ending his highly rated show, Tucker Carlson Tonight. The primetime host was known for pushing baseless conspiracies, including lies that the 2020 election was stolen from former President Donald Trump. Carlson's exit comes after Fox settled a multi-million-dollar defamation suit with Dominion Voting Systems over the network's dissemination of misinformation. And a similar shakeup at CNN, the news giant fired longtime anchor Don Lemon. Lemon faced criticism in February for on-air remarks about women and aging, but he's made many concerning comments over his 17 years with CNN. A Kentucky police officer who fired the fatal shot that killed Breonna Taylor has a new job in law enforcement.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
Demonstrators gathered at the Carroll County Courthouse this morning to protest the hire. Miles Cosgrove started working for its sheriff's department last week. He was fired from the Louisville Metro Police Department in 2021 for violating use of force procedures and failing to use a body camera during the raid on Taylor's apartment. Breonna Taylor was killed in March of 2020 by police executing a no-knock search warrant. The Coronation Stone next, the story of a legendary symbol crucial to the crowning of King Charles. We're less than 2 weeks away from the coronation of King Charles III, and that Stone of Scone will sit under the coronation chair. But as Crystal Gamansing explains, the precious object has a storied past.
The Stone of Scone, named after the medieval village in Perthshire where it's believed to have originated and where, in ancient times, Scottish kings were crowned.
It's really an iconic object.
Archaeologist Rachel Pickering calls it a symbol of statehood. With the coronation of King Charles III, the Stone of Scone is having a renaissance.
Essentially stripped from the Scottish king and taken to England sort of as war booty, as a trophy of Edward I's victory over Scotland.
War booty from 1296. King Edward I had the precious stone, also referred to as the Stone of Destiny, incorporated into a new throne at Westminster Abbey, starting its use in coronations in England. But in 1950, there was a robbery.
It was during the early hours of Christmas morning that the historic Stone of Scone was removed from the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey.
Somehow, 4 Glasgow University students broke in and stole it.
I have no idea how they managed it. Such a great, big, heavy object. They apparently dragged it on a coat along the tiles through Westminster Abbey.
4 months later, it showed up at the Arbroath Abbey in Scotland. But it wasn't until 1996 that the UK government and Queen Elizabeth II agreed it should remain in the north. When the Stone of Scone was officially returned to Scotland, 10,000 people lined up here along the Royal Mile and watched it make its way back to Edinburgh Castle, where it has lived ever since under lock and key. Legend has it the stone was used by the biblical figure Jacob. It possibly traveled to Egypt, Spain, and later Ireland. But Historic Environment Scotland is confident of its local origins. Since its return to Scotland, experts have been testing and analyzing the stone. High-resolution imaging recently revealed something resembling Roman numerals etched into the sandstone, leading to a new area of research.
I hope that now we have an opportunity to celebrate the object and to emphasize just how interesting and important this is.
A rock-solid link to past, present, and future. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, Edinburgh, Scotland.
And Global News will have special coverage of the King's coronation on May 6th. Donna Friesen will be live in London at 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Pacific, right here on Global. And that's Global National for this Monday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Monday evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Long Lake in Yellowknife. Chris Galis will be on the anchor desk tomorrow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.